Hello everybody! Welcome to another video from Code Shots with Profanis. In this video, we will see what the ngTemplate is in Angular and how to use it. So without any further delay, let's get started. Let's say that we have this container and we want to present our content there. We want to render our content there. And since the video is about ngTemplate, we're going to have several templates. We're going to have the template A with content A, and the template B with content B, and the template C with content C. Please note here that every ngTemplate has a template reference variable, and we will see more about this in the next minutes. Since we now have three different templates, we can decide which one to render, and perhaps we're going to render the template A, or we're going to render the template C, or even we're going to render both of them, A and C. Please note here that the ngTemplate elements do not render by default. This means that we need some more instructions, and we will see what kind of instructions these are. At first, let's see the syntax. The syntax is the ngTemplate, and then we need a template reference variable. And we need this template reference variable since we have later on to refer to that template so that we can differentiate one from the other. And speaking of referring to the templates, this is one approach. For example, I have here the template A, and I want to dynamically render this template by using the ng container and the structure directive ngTemplateOutlet. At this point, no worries if you do not understand what the ng container and the structure directive ngTemplateOutlet is, since this is what I'm going to explain in this video. And furthermore, we might want to render this template with a specific context, so we have to provide the context here. Again, this is what I'm going to explain in this video. So let's get started with the code. Think that we have this div element here, and it says rendered element, and we can see it right here in the browser. Perhaps you have already used the ngTemplate using the ngIf condition. Perhaps we have here the ngIf condition, and if I have an expression to true, I will render this element, like we see here. But if this expression is false, we're going to render this element, and perhaps we need to have an else statement here. And the else statement, if you remember, this requires to have a template there. So let's do this. I will create here just an ngTemplate, and I will define a name, and I will name it like else content, no more than this, and this is the alternate content. Nice. So let's now use this here. As you can see, what we have in the browser is this is the alternate content, because this is what we have into the template. So let me do the following. I will convert this to true expression, and I will inspect the element. As you can see, we have only the rendered element here, which is a div, and we do not have the ngTemplate. Like I said, this is not rendered by default. So the ngTemplates are mainly used by structural directives, such as the ngIf. And you know what? Angular already uses the template, the ngTemplate behind the scenes. So whenever we see the div ngIf, behind the scenes is something like that. So let me do this for you. Here we have the ngTemplate, and I will have the ngIf, and perhaps this is going to be just a true statement, and this will be my rendered element. And I will comment this out. So this one and this one is equivalent, or to be precise, this is equivalent, since we need to have also the div element, like this. And as of the else statement, here we can have the ngIf else, and then we have to provide again the else content, something like that. Here we have the rendered element, and if I convert this expression to false, now we have the alternate content. Nice. So this is how Angular behind the scenes uses the ngTemplate into the structural directives. But how about now if I want to have something more dynamic? I want, for example, to have my else content or whatever, and I want to present this regardless of the if condition. So let's create three different elements. Like we saw previously into the slides, we said that we can have something like a container where we can decide which template to render. So perhaps this is my container and I want here to have either A or B or C. To accomplish this, we can use the ngContainer using a structure directive naming ngTemplateOutlet. So here I can have my ngContainer. So for now, let's delete the div to make it more clean. And I will use the ngTemplateOutlet. ngTemplateOutlet. And here we have to provide the template. So I want to dynamically render the template A. And actually we would expect to see it here. So let's see what the problem is. Cannot bind to ngTemplateOutlet. Yeah, so let's go to the source code. Here I have just the ngIf, but you know what? Let me import the common module so that we'll have also the ngTemplateOutlets as well. So here we can see that we have the content A. And now if I want to have the content B, we can do this as well. And perhaps we can have all of them, A, B, and C as well. Content A, content B, and content C. So this is how we use the ngTemplateOutlet to dynamically render a template. Perhaps you have already seen the ngTemplateOutlet, but instead of using the asterisk, which means structural directive, perhaps you have seen it with brackets like this. And in this case, we have to convert the ngContainer to ngTemplate. So let's now see how to use a template by providing a context. And before I start coding, let's understand what the context is. Perhaps we have three different templates, the template A and the template B, and this guy requires to have a template, let's see, something like that. I want to have my username, my first name, a last name, and everything to be wrapped into a paragraph tag, and then I have a colon. Okay, so this is my template A, and perhaps then I want to have my template B, which might have a different representation. Something like that. So now we have two different templates. According to a condition, we might want to have this or that. But you know what? We need somehow to provide the context. Before we do so, let's go to the source code of the app component into the TS, and I will create here just a context object. And now let's use this. And something similar will go into the other template. As you can see now into the browser, we have the template A, which has the username, the first name, and the last name. How about now if I change the template? Something like that. We have different representation. The first note here is that in terms of context, we can use the outer context inside the template. That's why we can use the context object, which is part of this source code. But how about if I want to use my own context there? How can I do this? When we're defining the template, we also have to define the context, and this is under ngTemplateOutletContext, and I will provide here just the context. And when I say context, I mean this one. So what I'm doing now is that I'm providing the username, first name, and last name into this template, and this template has to use them. I will create a variable scoped into that template, and I will name it username equals to username. And then I will provide another one, and I will name it first name equals to the first name, and then I will have the last name. And I will explain what this is all about. Last name and last name. And now we no longer need to have this context dot. So I will delete. And as you can see, into the browser, it works just fine. So let's do the same into the other template, in the template A. So here we have again username, first name, and last name, and I will delete the context dot. And if I now change the template B to template A, by providing the same context, we can see now that we have the username Profanis, the other template, which has the colon. To explain how this is used, let me do the following. I will change the name here to my username and my first name, and again, my last name. So this is my username, my first name, and my last name. And let's also switch to template B. Nice. When we're declaring a variable into the template, we use the let keyword and then the name of the variable. So if you remember, the context has the username, first name, last name, which is just an object. And here we're saying that my username will have the value of my username property of the context, and the same for my first name and my last name. You can think of that into that way. Let's say that I have here the function A, which accepts three different arguments: my username, my first name, and also my last name. And then perhaps I would have another object, and the object will have the username. Or you know what? Let me copy paste this. And now I want to invoke that function, the function A. This accepts my username, but this is just the name of the argument, right? And the same for my first name and my last name. But when I invoke this function, I'm providing the username, and the same here. I will provide the first name, and then I will provide the last name. This is another analogy of how the variable declaration works into the ngTemplates. Sometimes it's a bit annoying to have that many variables, right? So we have now 3 of them. How about if we have 4, 5, or 10? Do we have to do this again and again? The other option is to provide the context by using the implicit, $implicit, and then I will use the context here. What this is doing, or you know what, let me first apply the code and I will explain what this is doing. Instead of having now the username and the last name, I will just have here the user, and now I will do user.username, user.firstname, and user.lastname. And let me do the same into the other template to avoid having any errors. What this means is that now the implicit as a property has the context. And like we said, the context has 3 properties: the username, first name, and last name. When we use implicit, we can use a variable without assigning any property from the context. And this is equals to this $implicit. Either this one or just defining let user is the same. So let me now delete this. So have let user and the user, username, and so on and so forth. So this is another option of how to provide the context into your template. So this is sort of the theory of how to use the ngTemplate. Let's now jump into the implementation, and I will show you 2 different examples. The first example is to create a custom structure directive. So let's open the terminal, and I will do the following. I want to generate a directive under directives, and I will name this has permissions. Before starting the implementation of the has permissions, let's do the following. So let me comment everything out. And let's say that we want to use now the has permission directive, and the has permission will be responsible to gather the user, the logged in user, and will return back whether the user has read or write access. So the implementation will be something like that: has permissions, and then I want somehow to know if the user can read or the user can write. So let's now jump into the directive implementation. Since we're talking about a structured directive, we have to use the template ref, and then also we need to use the view container ref. So let's now go into the onInit and we'll start coding. So let's now assume that somehow into the constructor we have a service, and that service is responsible to gather the user. And we end up to have this user. The username is Profanis and the permissions of that user is only read. Perhaps this is the information that returned from the server, from the API. So now we can do the following. This view container ref, and I will explain what this is all about. Create embedded view. And into the create embedded view, we have to provide a template. Which template? This one, this template ref. What we're saying by using this command is that I want to create an embedded view where into the container, which view? This template. So at first, let's go and use this. Has permission directive, and I have first to go into my app component and import this here. This is just a standalone directive. And then I have to use it here. App has permissions. So let's go to the browser to see if everything works as expected. So here we have the can read and then we have the can write. Nice. So it seems that it works just fine. Please note that before we create the embedded view, we would like also to clear it. Otherwise, according to some circumstances, we might end up having the same view more than once. So we're clearing and then we are creating the template. Nice. So here we have the can read and can write. And if you remember, the template accepts also a context. And we can even use a context here. And the context can be the can read to true or the can write to false. But instead of having the hard-coded value, we can have something like user permissions includes read, and the same for the other. And here we need to have write. Oops, I have an error here. So this is the template ref. So now what I'm doing is that I'm providing the can read and can write. And how can I use this? Into the app has permissions, I will do the following. Let can read and let with semicolon here and let can write. And now let's do just the following. Here I will have the can read, something like that, into a paragraph tag, and then I will have the same for can write. So this is the variable name. I didn't use the value from the context. And what is the value from the context? Equals can read. And the same here. Equals can write. And as you can see, can read is true and can write is false. This is the value from the context, or to be more precise, this is the property from the context, and this is the variable that we have just declared into that template. And we can define whatever name we wish. For example, my can read. And here we can have my can write. And now let's create the same one, but instead of using a div, I will create just an ngTemplate. So into the ngTemplate, I'm going to have this one. And I'm going to use a structural directive which is responsible to render this template. And this is my app has permissions. And then I can have the following variables. Let my can read equals to can read, and the same goes for to can write. Something like that. What we have achieved here is that we have the template, and like I said in the beginning of the video, the templates do not render automatically. We need to have a structured directive which help us render this. And now let's do the following. Let's have this side by side. This is my template, and this template corresponds to this template ref. And when we are saying that I want to create the embedded view of that template by this context, we mean this template by providing this context that can read and can write properties. And this is how it looks like into the browser. It seems to work just fine. So let's now jump into another implementation. In the previous video where we discussed about content projection, we had this card component, and the card component had different slots, and one of them was the content. And the content, we had to have it like this since we wanted to have a condition. But now let's do the following. At first, let me use the app card into my app component HTML. So let me comment this out. And below here, I will use my card grid. So let's now go to the browser to see what we have. So this is my card. And as you can see, I have the image, I have the title, I have the text, and then I have the button. So we're going to change this one. So let's give it a try. Into the card component, here we have the ng container, we have the ngTemplateOutlet. So it seems that we already have the template here, right? So let's utilize this. And I will stick to the same example like we had here with the user card, the username, the first name, and last name. So I will grab this one and I will move it here. And I will name this like my default template. And if my card main content is not present, I'm going to use my default template. But you know what? I also need to have here the context. So let's move the context as well. I have to go to the app component TS, grab the context, just copy, and go to the card component. And I will have here my context. So into the context, I have the username, I have the first name and last name. Nice. So now pause the video a bit and think, how can I use the context, this one, this context, how can I use it here into this template? Fast forward to this, we have to use the ngTemplateOutlet context, and we have here to provide the $implicit providing the context. And this is happening for the default template. But how about for the one that we have just provided? So let's go to the app component HTML. And here we have this template, and let's move a bit up. And here we have the other template, which is a table. I'm copying the code and I will paste it here. So let's think this a bit. How can I grab now the context of that template? Because at the time that we want to render the template outlet, we're providing by implicit the context. So perhaps here I can do the following. Equals let user. Something like that. And it seems to work just fine. Profanis, Fanis, and Prodromo. And how about now if I do not provide this? If I do not provide at all this div element which has my template. So let's delete this and go to the browser. So nothing here. So let's go to the code to see what we have. And into the ng container, we have, I do not need to have this condition. If I have my card main content, then I will use this one, otherwise the default template. And the default template is this one. And this is it. We have the default template printed. And please note here a difference compared to the video into the content projection. That here into the content child, I have the option read template ref, and I did this based on a comment that I received into that video. So that was it. We managed to see how to use the ngTemplate in different ways, and at first we started with the theory and we ended up using two different implementations. I hope you liked the video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.